Life Unrehearsed on CJD 800, brought to you by alavida.ca. Celebrate a life well lived before or after death.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed, a show where we talk about the ins and outs of family life. It might be about yourselves, maybe your elderly parents, or even the kids. We discuss these topics and we navigate you through them all. My name is Matt DelVecchio. I specialize in free retirement home search and senior transitions, and I'm here with our new co-host with show number 2 under her belt, Corrie Sirota, a clinical social worker and psychotherapist specializing in grief and loss. Corrie, for her second show, is actually joining us from Chicago as she's attending a national bereavement camp conference. Corrie, are you there?
I'm here, Matt.
Glad you could be with us. This is truly, for a second show, not so bad, calling in from the States, and glad you could join us on show number 2. You know, we have...
I wouldn't miss it.
Fantastic. Corrie, we have, and as you know, we've got a great schedule for today coming up. Why is it that we tend to procrastinate on some of the more important family discussions? In other words, do you know what to do if something happens? For example, you can't care for yourself, or you can't care for a parent, or a parent can't care for themselves. Is what you want the same as what your siblings would want? The same as what your parents would want? So this is going to be very interesting as we speak to a life transition expert about essential conversations we should be having with our families and loved ones. Looking forward to that. Now, Corrie, Chicago, what brings you there?
Chicago, the windy city, which is now the rainy city. As you mentioned, I'm here for a camp conference. I'm actually presenting a workshop on understanding the behavior of children, what lies beneath. So it's very exciting, but I wouldn't miss being on the show, so I had to burn the candle at both ends.
Oh, good for you. No, and you are a speaker at the conference, I understand, right?
Yes.
Way to go. Way to go. You know, at my end, we had a show a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very, very fortunate that I have both my parents around. It was my dad's 75th birthday on October 9th. We had the show on the 8th. Didn't mention it, so I want to mention it now. And, of course, I have to mention today, October 22nd, is my mom's 75th birthday party. So big shout out to Mom. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Mom DelVecchio. Do you have any special plans?
Well, you know, I flew in with my daughter last week. She lives in Toronto, and we did a surprise last weekend before your first show. And I'm actually in Toronto on business this week, so I'll be able to see her again this week. So looking forward to that.
So nice.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. Now, Corrie, I talked about the first half. What about the second half?
Well, I am very excited about the second half because leading in from Essential Conversations is a conversation that none of us really like to have, particularly women. We're going to be talking about women and money. I think it's a fascinating topic because it's such a taboo topic, and our guest is going to really share some very, very relevant tips about how to talk about the whole issue of money and also why we need to. And the funny thing about this is I'm saying women, but the truth is I think that anyone can benefit from these tips that she's going to be sharing.
Well, in talking to her, I guess I know everyone will be able to pick up a few tips for sure. And so let's get right into it. I'd love to introduce to you, very, very proud to have a renowned guest, Dr. Amy Dupree, affectionately known as Dr. Amy. She's a life transition expert and also a dear friend of mine. Dr. Amy speaks across the country on many topics, including essential conversations for families, and she joins us from Toronto. Dr. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matt. Hi, Corrie. How are you?
Oh, good. Hi. So nice to chat with you.
Yes, I'm really happy to be on the show today.
Well, Dr. Amy, thank you for spending some time. I know you have a crazy travel schedule, so we appreciate your time, and we're very much looking forward to your input and feedback. And I guess we have to start right off the bat, Amy, with what do you mean by essential conversations?
Matt, when I talk about essential conversations, what I say to people is I'm talking about the things that we need to chat with the most important people in our lives. So often these are things that we, as Corrie said, kind of avoid, or at least if we don't actively avoid it, we may not get around to it. So just think about the things that you need to talk about with the most important people in your life.
Fair enough. So could you give us an example, or maybe even the top three?
I can. These are I've had the great pleasure, Corrie, of working with older adults and their families for over 30 years now. And in my work, both as a speaker, but also working with families, I have found there are three areas that if people would just talk about them, it would improve the quality of their life. It would improve the communication and the harmony in families. And the first one is really your vision for the future. How do you want to spend your time and with whom? This is especially true for people who are entering the retirement years or newly in the retirement years. They often haven't talked with their spouse, with their kids about how they want their life to go as they move forward. And of course, that conversation changes as we move into our later years. So as you move from your 60s to your 70s to your 80s, you still need to be talking about your vision for the future, but that may look different.
Yeah, that conversation.
I'm sorry, Matt, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and the conversation does change. And you're listening to Dr. Amy Dupree here on Life Unrehearsed. She's a life transition expert. And I cut you off there. You're about to talk about one of the second important point that we need to talk to families about.
Yes, and what I say to people when I say about essential conversations, I say these are really the things that you need to think about, plan for, and talk about. So the first part of talking about them is really talking about them with yourself, contemplating. And I ask people to think about who they want as their thought partners as they age. And I love this idea of thought partners because these don't have to be people who are going to be engaged in care or even have that active of a role in our lives. But likely they're people whose opinions we value, who may have information we may not have, and they may be people who are going to walk the journey with us as well.
It's very interesting when you say thought partner, you would assume automatically it's going to be your spouse or loved one, but that's not necessarily the case.
Well, sometimes we need to be talking to people who don't have as much emotional involvement in what's happening. I say to people, think about, should your thought partners be your spouse, your kids? Often our siblings are great thought partners. Many of us have at least one sibling that we feel we respect their opinions and have that level of relationship. And our friends are certainly possible thought partners. And then don't forget about professionals, because professionals can be really important thought partners as well.
I think there's a lot of social service agencies that can even offer those kinds of services. So definitely there's plenty of resources out there. But how would someone know to access that?
About thought partners, are we talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think thought partners, again, can be very informal in our lives as well. So I'll give you an example, Corrie. I recently had two friends of mine from university visiting. We've known each other now for 35 years. And we started having those conversations at 55 about, okay, as we get older, what's the vision for our lives? And what's the role we want to play for each other? And we said, we know each other inside and out. We know what we value. We know what's important. So we'll turn to each other as thought partners in addition to other people. So thought partners can be people you've known your whole life, or they may be people that have entered your life in a professional relationship. It could even be a financial advisor could be a thought partner, obviously, around your money. Or a lawyer could be a thought partner around your estate planning. But the idea is that you don't want to go it alone.
Okay, fair enough. I have a concern about these thought partners, and I want to raise it because there's something about a challenge when you have to have these discussions. So I think that can we look at that after we break for the news?
Yeah.
Oh, actually,
that sounds great.
Traffic.
Actually, what we'll do, I think that was a very interesting point, Corrie. And this would, so Dr. Amy, we're going to head to the CJD Traffic Center for a traffic update, and then we'll get right back to Corrie's question.
Life Unrehearsed on CJD 800, brought to you by alavida.ca. Celebrate a life well lived before or after death.
Well, there's a little tribute to Gord Downey in the song called Courage. And very often the discussion we're talking about essential conversations takes courage. Now, Corrie, before the traffic update, you were talking about dispute resolution, I guess, and you wanted to ask a question to Dr. Amy.
I believe that we absolutely have to have these conversations, but I think there's a real concern that these are very, very uncomfortable and sensitive, so even potentially emotional. So how do we do this, Dr. Amy? Help us out here. How do we do this without running the risk of huge family disputes?
Well, and some families do get into huge family disputes. And what I say is if your family can do these on their own, that's great. And if you need the support of a social worker, a geriatric care manager, or someone else, you're not alone. So don't hesitate if your family can't manage it. The other thing I say is you don't have to talk to everybody at once. Sometimes we think we have to gather everybody in one room and have conversations. I know when my mom talked to me and my siblings about what she wanted for end-of-life care, she did it with individual conversations, and I didn't even know she talked to everyone until we ended up in hospice together, and I found that she had sat down with each of us and had the same conversation. Now, ideally, Corrie, I'd love it if everybody sat in the same room and could hear it all at the same time, but I'm a realist, and I've worked enough with families to know that we often have, let's say, difficult family members in our view, or in-laws that feel like outlaws, or the family member that's the disruptor. So here's what I recommend for how you do the conversation if you can. And then again, remember, you may need an outside person. Make sure that you really identify what you're talking about. It may sound like an obvious or a silly thing, but what sometimes happens with families when they sit down to talk is it becomes a kitchen sink conversation. Everything gets thrown in. So I always say, just say, this is what I really want to chat with you about today, and I know other things are going to come up, and let's put those on hold. Now, the important thing is to make sure those actually get scheduled to talk about. The second thing is it's really important to start with processing, not problem solving. And what that means is giving people an opportunity to talk about how they feel about things. I strongly believe one of the greatest human needs is to feel heard and understood, not necessarily agreed with, but heard and understood. And sometimes in our families, this can be very, very challenging because we have such an extensive filter for what our family members think and feel and who they are.
You bring up some great points, Dr. Amy. This is Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt DelVecchio with Corrie Sirota, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Amy Dupree with us. And Dr. Amy is a life transition expert. And you're talking about some excellent suggestions, and we just hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of the topics, because I would imagine there are so many topics. You've talked about the vision for the future and who should your thought partner be. You were mentioning before off air that estate planning is important, and estate planning needs to go even beyond money. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's the part that gets most families in trouble, Matt, is we think it's the money. It's actually all about the things that we may own that may have emotional value, but not necessarily have monetary value. That's where families often get in the most trouble, and it's the thing that people don't think to put in their wills or to talk about ahead of time about how those things get divided. And again, often that's based on our values and who we want to have things, or just who we think people might want certain things in our lives. But giving people an opportunity to deal with that while we're still alive is one of the greatest gifts that we can give our families.
I certainly agree with that. Although at the same time, I wonder about those family members that are in denial that this is even something that's going to happen, even though the inevitable.
Right. And, often what I call Generation 2, the adult kids will say, why are we talking about this? Is there, you're healthy. Why do we need to be talking about that? And so I always say to people, blame me if you've heard something on the radio or you've been to a speaking event of mine and say, hey, I heard this speaker. She keeps pushing this. And it shouldn't just be the older adult. Really, all of us who are in our middle years as well are old enough to be talking about these things. We wait too long to have these conversations.
That's Dr. Amy Dupree, life transition expert, talking essential conversations that we must have with families. Dr. Amy, you're also talking beforehand about we had you hear, and I'm Italian, so you hear the stories of Nana having money stashed away and no one knowing about it, and you had a funny story that you've experienced that with one of your attendees to one of your conferences.
Well, I was talking to people about the importance about having some savings and a nest egg, to make sure we're well prepared. And this woman came up to me at the end and she said to me, now, I'm just curious, when you talked about the nest egg, is that the money we hide from our husbands? And I said, well, whether you hide it from your husband actually isn't any of my business, but it's good to have some money put aside. And, as you know, Matt and Corrie, money conversations are often some of the most difficult for people to have.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And can I just jump in with one other thing I want to say, which is, we talked about identifying the topic of the conversation and giving people a chance to talk about their feelings.
Right.
Once you've done that, you really can generate solutions or share information and make decisions. And another key thing you want to do when you have a family conversation is schedule a follow-up. Because what happens is some people need to go away and think about things. They process more slowly. And it just allows this to open up a dialogue. Instead of seeing these as one-and-done conversations, I say to people, keep them small and then have another small one, because there are a lot of things we need to be talking about.
Well, you mentioned structure is a very important piece, and I think that that's very sound advice. And you also talked a little bit about how certainly people need to feel heard and they need to feel validated, and then they perhaps won't feel as overwhelmed with the discussion. Who should be going to who, or even what's the sentence someone should say to someone else when they want to start this?
Well, again, I think it depends which generation is starting this conversation. If you're the adult child going to your parent, you can say, Mom, or Dad, I want to make sure that you have what you want as you get older. And the only way I can do that is to really know what it is you want, what your wishes are. Can we have a conversation about that? And then you can also, if you're the adult child, say, and this is a conversation I should be having too. Again, there's no magic age. And if we're in our 30s, 40s, or 50s, we can talk about what we would want as well. And there are wonderful guides to this. I know it's not all end-of-life stuff. This is also earlier conversation.
Very much so.
But hospice palliative care in Canada has a fabulous guide for end-of-life conversations called Speak Up. That's a great guide that I recommend to people. You can Google Speak Up and find that. But again, think beyond end of life. Think about your vision for the future. Think about, the conversations about where you might want to live. There's a whole host of them. How about if you can't drive anymore? What is it that you want in your future? This is about choice, control, and independence in our lives forever. That's what we're trying to create. And the only way to create that is to talk about what we want so people can carry that out for us.
You're listening to Life Unrehearsed. Matt DelVecchio here with Corrie Sirota, and this is Dr. Amy Dupree, a life transition specialist. Dr. Amy, a quick little story. In my day-to-day life, I help families and moms and dads move into retirement homes should they desire to do so. And sometimes it's very challenging because they want to stay home. But when you dig down deeper, it's amazing. We talk about abuse of parents and financial abuse. Very often it's the opposite. It's the parents not wanting to move into a retirement home because they've worked so hard for that money and they want to have a good inheritance for the kids. And the kids are saying, no, Ma, you can treat yourself. We don't really want this inheritance. You need to take care of yourself. And it's almost opposite directions that they're discussing. And what you're talking about with these essential conversations is if they both have the same end goal, I think it would make it a lot easier.
Absolutely. And, Matt, I do some of those conversations, and adult children will often say, you have no idea how much this contributes to my peace of mind to know that you have the life that you want right now. So there is a way, I think, to get people on the same page with that. And it's key because often people operate with assumptions that are just inaccurate, and they make major life decisions based on those assumptions.
It's amazing. It's we're already approaching the news hour, Dr. Amy, but this is a first for us, Dr. Amy, I have to say, because we were going to have you as our second guest. We're going to completely switch gears, and we're going to be talking women and money, something you specialize in, crossing the country on behalf of BMO and talking to a lot of advisors and their clients. And it's a fascinating topic that, Corrie, you're going to head up on the second half, because I think you are very interested in and have some interesting questions for Dr. Amy.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So
Me
next
too.
next subject with Dr. Amy, women and money. You don't want to miss this. But first, we're going to get a little bit of a traffic update. We're going to head to Luciano for a news update with Luciano.
Life Unrehearsed on CJD 800, brought to you by alavida.ca. Celebrate a life well lived before or after death.
There's a little Donna Summer working hard for the money. We're going to switch gears here. My name is Matt DelVecchio, specializing in free retirement home search and senior transition. I'm here with my co-host, clinical social worker and psychotherapist Corrie Sirota. She specializes in grief and loss, calling in today actually from Chicago. So Corrie, how's the Magnificent Mile?
The Magnificent Mile is magnificent. I am so excited to go out and shop till I drop. But here's the problem: we need to talk about money because. And by the way, if my husband's listening, no, I'm not at a conference. No shopping. I really want to learn more about women and money. It is a fascinating topic to me, and we are very lucky today to have Dr. Amy Dupree, who we also call Dr. Amy. She's a life transition expert, and one of her specialties is women and money. She actually travels across the country taking offering workshops and training for speaking with financial advisors and their clients about this topic in particular. And we have to call a spade a spade. This isn't only a women's issue. This is very relevant with people in general because it's such a, like I said earlier, a taboo topic. So I have no doubt that Dr. Amy, your advice today is going to benefit both men and women. Thanks so much for being on the show with us.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
I have to say that as a grief counselor, this topic particularly resonates with me because in my practice I see so many women who find themselves in financial crisis because when their partner dies, they have never written a check, they have never paid an invoice, and they are in complete state of panic. Not only are they grieving, but on top of it, now they're in a panic because they don't know how to manage. So please share with us how we can help them.
Well, you've brought up such a great part of this, which is as women, even those of us who are highly successful professional women, that there's a fairly large percentage of us who are still not as confident as men about money. And again, confidence doesn't equal competence here, but our confidence, our lower confidence, gets in the way of us being proactive. So I'm on a bit of a mission, Corrie, to help women become more proactive and in control of their finances, both today and in the future.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, part of it is we have to break it down a little bit. I think money can feel like a mystery to lots of people. And when I do this talk for BMO, we talk about looking at day-to-day finances, the inflow and outflow of your money, long-term savings, that could be for retirement or a house or your child's education, and then estate planning, your wills and powers of attorney. So breaking it into those three areas and then saying, okay, what is it that I need to educate myself about? Because one of the best things that we can do is find our gaps of what do we not know that we need to know. So education is the first thing we can start with.
And you talk about education, Dr. Amy, and that's a broad topic. And you know what? I really like your example of confidence versus competence, because there is a difference there. I think many people are competent, but it does come down to confidence. And how much is the confidence related to the education?
Well, it is, because as we educate ourselves, We do. It's related because we start to become more confident. And what I say to people is, there are so many great books and websites, and then there are financial professionals who can help us. But there's lots geared to those of us who may feel like we don't know much of anything on a topic. So if we can start with the basics, that helps. And then, Matt, we have to step up and look at other ways to increase our confidence. And confidence, the more confidence we have, the more likely we are to be proactive. So I work a lot with women, and you're absolutely right, Corrie, this applies to men too. But I typically work with women to help them become more confident.
Okay, fair enough. We are listening to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Corrie Sirota with Matt DelVecchio, and we're talking to Dr. Amy Dupree about women and money. She is a women and money expert. And my question is, we talked about confidence. What about awareness?
Well, awareness is very key. Again, with awareness, that's how we educate ourselves. And so what happens, I've seen, and I love that you called me, a money expert. What I would say is what I've become an expert in is helping. There are probably family members laughing all over North America right now. But what I think I have developed some expertise in is helping women step up to the plate. And, one of the things as women that we don't recognize that gets in our way sometimes is our self-talk, what we say to ourselves. I say to women, if you could listen to what you say to yourself, you would never say it to a good friend. And if you don't believe me, go home and stand naked in front of a full-length mirror and listen to what you say to yourself, because very few of us standing naked in front of a full-length mirror look for only the positive. And we're kind of geared to find what we don't do well. So I try to get women to flip it and to talk to themselves like they do their best friend. And around topics where we don't feel confident, it's doubly important. So not to beat ourselves up for what we don't know or the financial mess we may be in at any given time, but instead to start saying, what are the little steps I could take, and how do I be gentle with myself?
Now, Dr. Amy, in the previous segment, we talked about a thought partner. Could this analogy be transferred into a woman and money? Is there, and you may have another term for that in terms of a partner that you could rely on, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a spouse.
Exactly. I do think we need thought partners on this. If we can take this topic out of the closet, we'd be so much better off. I read an article once that said we are more comfortable talking to our friends about our sex lives than we are about how much money we make. And that makes us probably laugh a little bit. But the truth is, it's not a topic we talk about very comfortably, and we have to have someone or someones who we can talk to. And this can be a financial professional, but often we have a friend or someone who can also be there for us as we go through, perhaps cleaning up our financial life, or perhaps just taking it to the next level where, again, we're more in control for the future.
Okay, I want to dig a little bit deeper. The therapist in me says this is absolutely so important, but where do you think this comes from, that it is such a difficult thing for us to talk about?
It's such a long-term issue, I think, Corrie. There's a book that's no longer out for publication. You can get it on an e-reader, but it talks about women, emotions, and cash, and she traced the history of women and money. And if you look, as women, we haven't had much power around money until fairly recently. Women couldn't write checks, women couldn't get mortgages, women didn't have their own credit. That's not that long ago. So if you look at how most of us were probably raised around money, there were probably residual issues around that. And certainly from a societal standpoint, there still are residual issues around that. So I think we're kind of turning around, a large ship, if you will, and moving in the right direction, but we still have a ways to go on this.
I think that's such an important point, and we hear so much about gender equity, and Prime Minister Trudeau saying, well, it is 2015 or 16 in terms of gender equity. So it will take some time. I don't know if it's generational, but certainly movement is in absolutely the right direction. This is Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt DelVecchio, along with Corrie Sirota, who is calling in from Chicago, and we have Dr. Amy Dupree, a life transition expert, calling in from Toronto. And Dr. Amy, Amy, thanks very much for being with us. You brought up a couple very important points in terms of which financials, if we have to financial issues, if we have to prioritize some of them, things like investments and retirement planning and power of attorney and wills. And I think they're all important. Sometimes it becomes, though, a little overwhelming when you have to look at the big picture. And what I'd like to do after a quick traffic update is if you could break it down for us, and if you had to focus in on one or two right off the bat, if you're not sure, what are those topics that we should tackle right away? But first, let's head to the CJD Traffic Center.
Life Unrehearsed on CJD 800, brought to you by alavida.ca. Celebrate a life well lived before or after death.
Money, 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 must be funny in the rich man's world. Money, 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 always sunny in the rich man's world. All the things I could do if I had a little
Little Money with ABBA. Corrie, I think you really like that song.
Yeah, no, I don't think that I was connected in. That's why.
There you go.
We're having a little technical difficulties, but we are good and we are back. And before the break, you're listening to Life Unrehearsed with Matt DelVecchio, and I'm Corrie Sirota. We're talking to Dr. Amy Dupree, life transition expert, and she is giving us a wealth of information about how to talk about money and what are the important ins and outs and aspects about what we need to know, particularly as women, but also just in general. So before the traffic update, Matt did pose a question about a few issues, like talking about investments, retirement planning, power of attorney, wills, and how to navigate those kind of financial issues as women or just in general. Can you comment about that?
Well, first, I have to say a disclaimer that I'm not a financial advisor, so I can't give advice on, what exactly should you do about those things. But here's what I can tell you. Please don't ignore those. And, it's easy to ignore them because they fall into a category that we think of as important, probably very important, but maybe not urgent, right? And this is a distinction that Stephen Covey in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People made, where he talked about things that were urgent or things sometimes like a ringing telephone that we grab during dinner and then we hear, "Congratulations, you have won." And we realized, this is definitely not urgent. But the things that are important in our lives often don't move up our priority list until something happens. Someone we know dies or loses a job or has a health issue. And so what we have to do is figure out how to take those things that are important and act as if they're urgent. And there are ways to do that I'm happy to share.
Well, you bring up such an important point, Dr. Amy, and what you're coming down to is, okay, if you're listening right now, and I think it's very appropriate for not just women, but men as well, what can we do right now to make this a bit more efficient in dealing with the financial issues?
Yeah, and I think the best thing to do, first of all, if you're uncertain what you should be working on first, you might need to talk to a financial professional about that and get your short-term, your medium-term, and your long-term list of things to work on. And then once you have that, what you need to do is to schedule time to begin working on it. I know this sounds crazy, but here's the thing. If you don't actually put it into your, whatever you use as a planning device, your phone or whatever, and book some time to do it, it will keep being put on the back burner because it won't feel urgent necessarily to get your will done, or it won't feel urgent to make sure that your retirement savings plan is working for you until something happens. So we want to move from reactivity to proactivity. And the best way to do that is to actually schedule time to begin working on it on a regular basis and then just move through that list.
It sounds so simple, and hats off to you, Dr. Amy, because you make it sound so simple. Very often we'll have doctors and it gets financial and technical and so on, but it's just straightforward. Schedule time, commit to it.
And you know what I can tell you, Matt, is that I've had to do this, so I can speak from experience because I know these things get backburnered, and I know it's hard. We all have to-do lists that are way too long already, right? So I say to people, let's be realistic. Maybe you're going to schedule 30 minutes twice a week to start knocking some of these things off. But you know what happens as you start to have success and you get things done? You want to keep going, and you start to feel that sense of control and competence in your financial life, and that grows and it spills over to other parts of your life. I've worked with lots of women to help them figure out, in the midst of working and kids and busy lives, how do you just slowly chip away at these things so that you're running your financial life rather than your financial life just being sort of out there and not necessarily out of control, but maybe you're not in control of it.
Doesn't have to be overwhelming, and take it,
does not.
one step at a time. Dr. Amy Dupree with us, and Dr. Amy, we've got to wrap it up already. We want to thank you so much for being with us. Very insightful. We'd love to have you back on the show. There is so much more we can talk about. But if someone needs to reach you, Dr. Amy, how can people reach out to you?
Oh, feel free to email me at dramey@drameycaregiving.com. And Matt and Corrie, I'd love to be back on the show. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with you today.
Well,
Our pleasure.
thank you.
Great to have you. Thank you.
Indeed, our pleasure. Now, next week, do you know what glossophobia is? Well, it actually affects about 70% of the Canadian population. Glossophobia is the fear of public speaking. And we will have an expert on this. Susanna Baum will be in studio with us next week, and she'll be talking about recommendations on how to make you feel a little more at ease when speaking in public. So thank you very much for listening to Life Unrehearsed. You can catch us every Sunday from 4 to 5, and we've got news coming up shortly.